Okay, folks, now we are in for a treat because our spiritual leader is actually going to speak with us in a lesson form rather than the usual walking lesson he is for us in his demeanor and his attitudes. And he's just the perfect person to lead this group at this time. And I want to tell you how much we appreciate that, Brian. So, without further ado, as they say, whatever an ado is, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our senior minister, our only minister, but our senior minister, Brian Walker.
Hopefully. A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 2 through 9. He began to teach them many things in parables, and in his teaching he said to them, "Listen. A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Other seed fell on rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain. Other seed fell into good soil and brought forth grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30 and 60 and 100-fold. And he said, if you have ears, let him listen." So, as recorded in the Gospels, we know that Jesus frequently taught in parables. So that particular parable is called the sower and the seed. And so we might begin by asking, what's a parable? So if you look in your dictionary, it'll say, a short story with a moral or spiritual point. Pretty straightforward. But then we might ask, well, why did Jesus teach in parables? And there are several reasons. One was the stories that he told were in the very familiar context that these folks knew. They were fishermen, farmers, shepherds, common people. And that's what the parables were about. So they could easily understand these stories. And the stories were memorable. It's easy to remember the stories that he told because of the structure and the vivid imagery. So it was easy to remember those stories. And also, it's possible to get across complex ideas and break them down in a story. And so he did that in the parables. In addition to which, sometimes he would give them a familiar situation and oftentimes, twist it in such a way that, it really kind of shocked you and got your attention and stimulated some thinking. And always there was some sort of moral or ethical kind of lesson, something so that people could reflect on their behavior or their relationships, that people could think about. And Jesus' parables are well known throughout our culture and really Christian cultures anywhere, and really anywhere where people are thinking about spirituality and know anything about the Christian tradition. Things like the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, the lost sheep, the mustard seed. All of these things are really kind of part and parcel of our culture, and as we grow up, we hear these different things, and they come to us in different ways, not just in church, but even in our common conversations, in our political dialogue, etc. But the most important reason that Jesus taught in parables is because he could get this multi-dimensional effect. That on the surface, there was a simple story that you could follow, and at the same time, there was a much deeper message using symbols and allegory and what we would call metaphysics to get across something that was at a much deeper level. So that, if you were simply reading the stories and getting a moral lesson from it, that is, to be a good person, that's all well and good. But if you have ears to hear, you could get a much deeper message that it is about a bigger reality, what Jesus constantly talked about, and that's the kingdom of heaven. That it was an entryway for you to get insights into the kingdom of heaven. So, in all of the parables, there's this basic kind of polarity or duality, that there's a surface story and there is something deeper. And that deeper part is, of course, about the divine part of us, what we call our Christ consciousness. And there is, the human part of us that lives these stories, that aspires to be the Good Samaritan, to go after the lost sheep, to have the faith of the mustard seed. So that the lesson, or what Jesus is teaching at a deeper level, is that everything is colored by the way that we perceive it, by the way that we think about it, just what we affirmed earlier. We have our life's experiences based on the way that we think about them. So if we have ears to hear, we can connect to that deeper part of us and that greater reality that is the truth in which we live and move and have our being. So now there's a reason I chose this particular parable, because our theme for the month is about listening. And if you were listening, the first thing Jesus says is, listen. That's a cue. Listen. And so it's not just that means that you have ears and hear, but can you listen from an open-hearted place to hear the deeper message? So let's take a look at a metaphysical interpretation of this and how we might interpret this parable. So the sower symbolizes the divine, the higher self, the Christ consciousness in each of us. And the seeds that the sower is spreading could represent divine ideas. And one of the things that you'll notice is that the sower is sowing these seeds everywhere, kind of profligate, if you will, very generous. I mean, you'd think, these poor farmers back there, they want to make sure that they're getting seed in the right spot. But this sower is throwing them everywhere. It reminds me of that line in Scripture about how justice falls on the wicked and the good. That this sower is putting divine ideas. They're just, these divine ideas are going everywhere. The universe is just filled with these divine ideas. And so they fall on 4 different types of soil, which could represent our consciousness and our receptivity to receiving these divine ideas. So the first is they fall on the path. And the birds come and eat them up. And the birds can represent a hardened or overly intellectual kind of approach where spiritual truths can't penetrate, and that we're easily distracted by our own thoughts, external influences, and so the seeds don't yield any kind of grain, any kind of fruit. The second area where the seeds fall are on rocky soil. And so what happens is they kind of sprout initially, but then they wither and dry because there's no depth of the soil there. And so it represents a kind of faith that doesn't have deep roots, that we haven't cultivated and prepared the soil. So there's the initial kind of joy and excitement, but that doesn't produce anything in the long run either. And more seeds fall on thorny soil. And so here, the seeds develop and grow up, but the thorns grow up with them and choke them out. And again, ultimately, there's no grain. So this is the kind of soil that we could see as really preoccupied with material kinds of concerns, riches, pleasures, all of the things that really get in the way of us getting in tune with these divine ideas that we're constantly being showered with. And so they don't reach their maturity and bear fruit. And the last is the good soil. And the good soil, as we can see from the parable, it represents a receptive, understanding, well-prepared consciousness that receives these divine ideas and has substantial spiritual growth and a manifestation of all life's truths. And even what Jesus is always inviting us into is to the transformation of our consciousness. And that yields 30, 60, 100-fold in grain. These divine ideas just keep on producing. And when we have good soil, when we've prepared it, when we've done our spiritual work, it makes for a life of abundance and joy. So I want to take this parable idea and translate it in a way that will make some more practical sense to you. So you can kind of leave with some kind of idea about how you might put this into practice. So I'm going to tell you about my experience at Unity Village when we were involved in a process called nonviolent communication, which I know some of you are familiar with, and I'm guessing many of you are not, but it's a communication process by Marshall Rosenberg, and an international organization that teaches this process to people who are ever interested around the world. And so when I started school in 2001, and we had our introduction to nonviolent communication, or NVC. So if I say NVC, that means nonviolent communication. In the community, if you hear NVC, you know what that means. But anyway, we had our introduction to that with a video on September 11th, 2001. Yeah, I still remember it very vividly. But you know, the good news was, this is part of our curriculum. I mean, what could be more fantastic to go to a school where they're teaching you NVC, huh? So that's it's a hooray and a celebration and a because that means that, it's going to invite you to places that go with that you're going to be vulnerable. And sometimes that can be a little, yeah. Anyway, so anyway, this NBC thing had a huge impact on me. Huge. In fact, I'm absolutely convinced that it was one of the reasons that I was called to go to Unity Village in Missouri. Which is kind of a big irony, because at that time, there was nothing going on in NBC in the Kansas City area, at least that was public, except at Unity Village. Whereas here, I was living in Santa Maria at the time in Orcutt, down in Santa Barbara, there was a very active community of NBC people that were really practicing this on a regular basis. Anyway, there were several of us in our class who really, really became true believers. And so we sought out additional training above and beyond what we were getting in the classroom. So that there were 4 of us, we went to Minneapolis and did a weekend training there. There were a couple of us, I was one of them. We came out to Corona, California, did a 9-day intensive that Marshall Rosenberg himself facilitated, along with some other NBC teachers. So I was really into it. And in fact, so there was an opportunity that we had as ministers. We had access to a nonprofit that would send you certain books, and they had a list of books, but they would send you books just for the cost of shipping. So basically, they were giving you free books for the cost of shipping. And so, during the course of the year, you became aware of this, and I looked in there and I thought, oh, wow, they're NBC books. There were 24 to a case. The cost of shipping at that time was about $8 or something like that. So I ordered 6 cases. So I had one gross of these NBC books. And I would do classes and workshops on the weekend. And of course, I'd give away the books. Hey, you heard about NBC? Here, try this. I was a true believer. And developed a practice group, and during the time that I was there, had a practice group that met weekly the whole time that I was at Unity Village. So one of my friends, because different people have a different reaction to things, and one of my friends who wasn't quite as enthusiastic as I was said to me that you got this stuff intravenously. It was like fed into my veins. I just saw this and I thought, holy smokes, this is what I came for. This is what I came to Unity Village for. So one of the things that I frequently experienced when I would be teaching a class is that people would say, well, I'm not violent. And it really pointed out a really important way in which the word was being used. And Marshall Rosenberg himself said that he wasn't all that crazy about using the word nonviolent, but it was in a tradition of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., so that we were nonviolent. And so the way that you can think about it, and the way I encouraged people to think about it, was the whole process of NBC was about connection with yourself at the deepest level, with other people, and with the universe in general. It really believed that we were all connected in this really powerful sort of way. And so the way that I encourage people to think about it is, in New Thought, we have this idea about error thinking. Error thinking, if you haven't heard about error thinking is when we think that we're separate. We think that we're not worthy. We think that we're only human. Okay, so that's error thinking. So that's the way that I encourage people to see this idea about violence. That you're doing violence to yourself when you language, when you speak, when you listen in a way that separates you from other people. That's violent. And so it really is at a very deep level, a spiritual practice, although it's presented in a very secular kind of way. So, so actually, one of the experiences I had at Unity Village was Chris was there, taking an NVC class. And so one of the things that distinguished Chris as a student
my homework? Oh, a chart.
You did this, didn't you? Yeah. So Chris, during the course of the class, engineer that he is, he made this algorithm. So an algorithm is a set of instructions. So basically you start off with a stimulus, and then you can go one way or you can go another way, and et cetera. And it charts out the whole thing. So I knew who Chris was. So one of the greatest satisfactions for me while I was back at Unity Village is, the different ministerial classes, they had their own organization and they had different things that they did, but they tithed. And one of the classes tithed to me because actually I was their teacher. So NVC was part of the curriculum, and after I graduated, I started teaching NVC to the ministerial students and to the spiritual education and enrichment students. And so that was really a great satisfaction for me. So you might ask, okay, so what is this NVC all about? So it's a communication process. As I mentioned, it's a spiritual practice, and it really helps us to be aware, to be alive in this moment. So it's another way that it really aligns with Unity teaching, because it operates from certain assumptions, and that is that we're all basically good, and that contributing to each other's well-being is something that we naturally want to do. And that when we don't do it, there's something that gets in the way. And if we can identify that and correct it, then we encourage this natural giving and receiving. It's just a natural process based on who we are as beings who naturally want to give. Another aspect is that we're each responsible for our actions and responses to others. That we're responsible for that. That's what Unity teaches. That we live life from the inside out, and that we have that power, how we think about things. And that our thinking and speaking can either connect us or disconnect us from life in general, from ourselves in particular, and from other people. So NVC is described as a literacy of feelings and needs. Literacy of feelings and needs. So it really helps you get in touch with what you're feeling. And we have an orchestra of feelings. Men are always kind of accused of having four: bad, sad, mad, glad. So it encourages you to really realize that part of the human experience is experiencing these different feelings, acknowledging them, and to be present to them. And that we all, in our human experience, have needs, and we all have common needs. We have needs of love and companionship, understanding, autonomy, a whole host of needs that we all have. And if we can connect with each other at that level, that we can understand each other, and that we can stay connected to ourselves, understanding what our own needs are, and understanding what other people's needs are, and feelings as well. And so in the process of, I'm going to focus on, in the limited amount of time we have, one aspect of NVC, and that is, how we listen. And so there are two symbols that are used in the process of NVC. One of them is a giraffe. And it's a giraffe because a giraffe has the biggest heart of any land mammal. Big heart, big heart. And also, because of that long neck, they have a perspective that helps you see in a bigger kind of area. So kind of more long-term than just short-term. And so, the giraffe signifies an emphasis on empathy, on compassion in the communication. All right. And so the other symbol is a jackal. Now a jackal is much lower to the ground and represents a different way of communicating and being. And that is, it's more judgmental, adversarial, and characterized by a more defensive and aggressive style of communication. So if you think about it, you got your jackal and you got your giraffe. And from the sower and the seed, you've got a kind of surface level, our human kind of understanding what the story is about. And then you have a deeper level of who the sower is, our divine. And it really can work the same way correspondingly with this whole jackal, which can represent our real ego-centered, kind of separated kind of view of the universe, and a giraffe, which has a really big heart and very compassionate and connected kind of way of the universe. And so if you think about those two approaches, it can help you to really put into practice this whole idea of the sower and the seed. And since we live in a high-tech kind of environment, I wanted to give you and show you a little high-tech kind of solution that you can use. So this represents a kind of consciousness that I would be in that would be, more focused on myself, Brian first, the rest of you people second. And I'm, defending my ego and just wanting to protect myself. And so that when you're in this jackal kind of state, when you get some kind of negative stimulus, there are a couple ways that you can respond. One is with the jackal ears out the way they are now. And so somebody says, something negative about me, and I say, yeah, and your mother wears combat boots. Because those are my jackal ears out. I'm going to be attacking. I'm going to be defending myself because that's my ego feeling kind of hurt. And then you can also have the jackal ears in, and then I'm focusing on myself and going, oh no, you did it again, Brian. You offended somebody, and you're such a jerk, and you always do the wrong thing. So there are different ways that you can respond. Now, when you respond in either one of those ways, you generally have outcomes that are not going to connect you. If the jackal ears are out, you're probably pissed and angry. And if the jackal ears are in, you're focusing on, guilt and shame and encouraging depression, all of those kinds of things. So there's another kind of consciousness you could have, and that is a more open-hearted, compassionate, empathic kind of awareness and intention. And so it's about, again, with the negative kind of stimulus, with the giraffe ears out, it's about focusing on, what are your feelings and needs? To hear underneath what the superficial kind of negative stimulus that you're telling me that, gee, Brian, you're a terrible minister. But I'm going, what is underneath that? What are you feeling and needing that you would give me this kind of message? And see that, you're disappointed because I didn't do something and you felt like that was really something that I should have done and I didn't respect you. Okay? So to get in touch with that. Or you can have the giraffe ears in and go, to be aware of what my feelings and needs are. When I get this negative stimulus, oh man, I feel really sad that someone would be saying this kind of thing to me. How can I, care for myself when I'm feeling so sad and wanting a need to have some support and to be respected? So I wanted you to get an actual experience for this. So I have a little short video for you here. And this is a little video of Marshall demonstrating how he does this. And one of the things he has done, I mean, he's passed now, but he went around the world introducing this to people and went to specific hotspots. He's going to talk about being in the Middle East here.
In your 40 years of mediating conflicts between warring factions around the world, what's the most important thing that you do that creates peace between the people involved?
First, I never hear what they think. See, I get called a lot of names by people who hear what I'm saying. I see you've read my book. You probably can recall I was in a refugee camp in Palestinian Authority, and what all the crowd had to do was hear from my interpreter that I was an American, and a gentleman jumps up and screams at me, murderer, and another one jumps up, assassin, and another one calls child killer. Within an hour, the guy that called me a murderer invites me to a Ramadan dinner at his house. I didn't hear what he thought of me. I connected to what he was feeling, what he was needing. As I walked into that refugee camp, there were hundreds of tear gas grenades all over the lawn, shot in the night before when they had a riot there. And on the side of each of the grenades was written, "Made in USA." So when this guy calls me murderer, hearing that I'm an American, I tried to hear, what is the guy feeling? And I said, "Sir, are you furious?" And then I tried to hear his needs. "Are you needing a different kind of support from my country than you're getting?" And he looks at me in a kind of a stunned way. Apparently that's not the way people respond to him usually when he screams at them. He said, "You're damn right. We don't have sewage. We don't have housing. Why are you sending these weapons?" So I said, "Well, then that makes it clear why you'd be so aggravated. If you don't have these basics and you get these weapons sent over here, I can see that your needs are for some other kind of support." He said, "Do you know what it's like to live under these conditions for all these years?" I said, "So you'd like me to understand just how desperate it can be even for one day, let alone for many years." So I heard what was alive in the guy. Not what he thought I was, a murderer. I didn't say I ain't killed anybody. I tried to hear what was going on in him. And when he trusted that I sincerely cared what he was feeling, what he was needing, he could start to hear me then when I said, "Look, I'm frustrated right now because I came a long way to be here. I want to offer something. And I'm worried now that because you got me labeled as an American, you ain't going to listen to me." He said, "What do you want to say to us?" So he could hear me then. And we have a school there now, one of the schools that we call a nonviolent communication school in that refugee camp. And whenever I go to that region, I'm well received hospitably in that refugee camp. But I had to see the human being behind the names that he was calling me.
So that's the question that the parable is asking you. Do you have ears to hear? Do you have ears to hear in a way that opens up your heart, that is present to what's going on in somebody else at a deep level, the feelings and needs, to your own feelings and needs, and being able to exchange that energy so that you can really hear yourself, really hear somebody else, really know that this is so powerful. And so I want to make sure that you get the importance of this message, because this is not easy stuff to do. It's not easy to hear sometimes what people have coming at you. So what I do is, because ideally I'd love to be like Marshall and to be in the moment, have my giraffe ears on and hear those feelings and needs. Unfortunately, too often I'm still kind of in that jackal place and I don't get there. However, when I reflect on things later, and say, oh, I didn't do that as well as I would have liked. I could have done this. And so the idea is to always bring that practice closer to the actual time when you have the exchange. One other important point, and this could be the most important point that I want to share with you, and that is, if you can't listen to others with an open heart, an open mind, without judgment, you can't truly listen to yourself. So it's worth making the effort. So let's finish with an affirmation. I'll say it for you. I am open and receptive to the divine ideas of my higher self. I am open and receptive to the divine ideas of my higher self. One more time with feeling. I am open and receptive to the divine ideas of my higher self. All right, friends, God bless you.